I'm Rachel.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome back to Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
This week, we'll be talking about Democrats' push to impeach Kristi Noem and a healthcare update. After that, we'll have an interview with Congressman Mackenzie, and we'll answer all of your questions about our lives on the Hill.
Welcome back, everybody. And this week is going to be crazy.
So crazy. I'm not ready.
I'm not ready. And to all the people who heard me last episode say, I will never, ever have to talk about another government shutdown or appropriations ever again. Wrong. And I jinxed myself. So from now on, I'm never saying that again because that was so upsetting for me. And I think one of the things that is kind of bubbling to the surface here on top of all of this funding nonsense is impeachment, which is a word that we haven't heard in a while.
But are very familiar with in our generation. We saw 2 impeachments without removals of President Trump during his first term, which I feel like our generation is more used to that word than a lot of other generations. I think that it's been becoming more common. Obviously, we saw people's push for impeachment with Merrick Garland last Congress or last presidency. And so now we're seeing another push to impeach Department of Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem. I think that was always a very controversial nomination. Obviously, we saw some of the stuff about her book come out whenever she was nominated about her
the pets.
Shooting her dog.
That was crazy.
There's just been a lot of stuff that people have been hesitant about with Kristi Noem. She was in Congress. President Trump has up to this point spoken very fondly of her. He's been defending her through everything in Minneapolis with the 2 fatal shootings, including law enforcement officers of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. But the president has pretty much stood behind Kristi Noem this whole time. But Democrats are obviously angry about what's happening in Minneapolis, and that's ultimately led to them pushing for impeachment, which is never going to happen. They don't have the votes. They have the minority in the House, the Senate, and they don't have the White House. And so impeachment is nearly impossible. I don't want to say anything is impossible, but
not anymore.
It is very close to being impossible. I know that House Homeland Security Democrats are trying to investigate her, which is hard because they can't subpoena people, which means they can't force anyone in the Trump administration or anywhere else to show up for interviews or hold them in contempt of Congress, which essentially gets them in trouble if they don't show up. Like if people don't show up in their investigation, it doesn't matter. And which makes it hard. They can't subpoena for documents or for interviews, which makes, obviously, an investigation much harder.
And I think going back to something that you had said, impeachment used to be something that was this rare power that Congress has. And when Democrats were looking to impeach President Trump in the first term, that was considered to be such a drastic thing. Especially, and after the events of January 6th, I think that one, obviously 10 Republicans joined and helped Democrats impeach him. And so that was something that was very much the correct use of the impeachment power that the legislative branch has. But prior to that, impeachment was not something that you just threw around. It wasn't a word that you used lightly. And especially now when Democrats virtually have no political power, it's hard, caveat to say that, it is hard to say that sentence and then look at everything the Democrats have done under this trifecta so far. I mean, they were able to force a vote on Epstein files. They were able to force a vote on ACA tax credits. So Democrats have shown that they can do things.
They can force things.
They can force things even when they have no power. The other caveat, though, on the other side of that is not to take away Democrats' victory lap from that, but truly, really the only way that Democrats were able to do all of that is because Republicans helped them. Because 4 Republicans signed on to the Epstein files. Because 4 Republicans signed on to the ACA discharge petition. So Democrats are right in saying, and Hakeem Jeffries has said this when he is brought to this pondering question of, well, you want to do impeachment, but you don't have the power. Is this just a show vote? Is it virtue signaling? And he said, well, no, anyone can do it. And look what we did with Epstein and what we did with healthcare. He's not wrong, but also that does take into account that he would need some Republicans to back this. And as of right now, I don't think Republicans are trying to give any sort of leverage to Democrats when it comes to impeaching Kristi Noem. I think that Republicans have been very vocal, saying that they do not like what's going on. They haven't really said much about her. A few senators, maybe a couple House members have said that they think that Kristi Noem is not doing her job correctly or is going as so far as saying, resign or get out of here. But you're not seeing the majority of House Republicans, even centrist ones, saying she needs to get out or we're going to support Democrats. I don't think you're going to see that. So I think that for people wondering if impeachment is going to be something that Democrats can also add to their victory lap list, it's not in the cards right now.
Yeah. I do think, though, that we are seeing record numbers of retirements, and they keep rolling in. And Senator Tom Tillis was one of the first Republicans to really go in on Kristi Noem and kind of just say that she's not doing a good job and kind of calling for her to step down. And so I'm
Lisa Murkowski, too.
Yes. And I'm kind of wondering, he's retiring at the end of his term. He is a very moderate Republican in the Senate. And I think that maybe if we see some of those moderate Republicans that are retiring, that would be one of the only forms of an olive branch that Democrats could get. Because obviously there are Republicans that are unhappy with what's going on in Minneapolis. A lot of them have come out and said that there needs to be investigations, but they, like you said, haven't come out and completely disregarded Kristi Noem in the same way that Senator Tillis has. So I do think it's an uphill battle. Leadership has stayed away from any sort of impeachment talks until this week, which was interesting, which I do think gives it more momentum than it had in weeks prior or months prior.
And last week, Hakeem Jeffries even dodged a little bit on whether he would sign on to the impeachment articles that the House currently has for Kristi Noem. They have nearly 200 people who are co-sponsored. And leadership, yet you haven't seen Jeffries, Aguilar, or Clark sign on to those impeachment articles. And according to what Hakeem Jeffries said last week, you probably won't. Yeah. He said that our statement has made it clear that if she doesn't resign and Trump doesn't fire her, then we will move forward with impeachment. But he did step away from saying whether or not he would forcibly put his name under that document. And I think that shows that if leadership throws all of their weight behind it, it kind of detracts away from previous comments that they made about impeachment. This is something I've covered a lot last year, is Democrats are rallying behind impeaching Kristi Noem in a way that they have steered very clear and united against impeaching Trump. When Sri Thanadar, who was a member from Congress from Michigan, introduced impeachment articles last year, I think it was in May, there was a pressure campaign from leadership, and they told him, you need to take these impeachment articles away, because if you do this, it's going to make Democrats look like all we care about is once again impeaching Trump, which would play into what Trump has said since he was on the campaign trail, since he's been in the White House. He is everybody loves to impeach Trump. He would have been proven right in that instance. Yeah. And so you even had progressive leaders. Greg Casar, leader of the Progressive Caucus, who is Trump's one of his biggest vocal opponents, saying this is a fruitless endeavor, this is a doomed impeachment vote, why would we do it? So you've seen Democrats be resoundingly against impeaching Trump because they know that it's not going to go anywhere. But with Noem, I think that they're trying to ride on this wave of anger that's coming not only from the Democratic base, but also from independents and Republicans. You're seeing Trump's approval rating going down. You're seeing a majority of Americans, which includes Republicans, now saying that they are against ICE operations, which a couple months ago, Republicans were resoundingly behind immigration efforts in different states. And now that's changing because to the public eye, because the administration hasn't allowed members to come and testify, although we're going to see testimony soon from some of these immigration leaders. No one's really gotten into the nitty-gritty of how they're conducting their behavior. It's all very wishy-washy. Some senators have said that members are being deployed without much training. It's not making the public feel very comfortable. Yeah. And I think maybe once we see what happens with these testimonies in front of the House and the Senate, if we see maybe Trump wrangle in Kristi Noem a little bit, let Tom Homan, the border czar, who seems to be actually someone who wants to get things done.
I think that it is also a better campaign tactic for Democrats going into the midterms. Democrats need to win back to the House to do anything that they want to do. And Republicans are messaging on that if Democrats win back the House, they'll put all of their effort into impeaching Trump instead of getting stuff done. And so I think that if they went after a Trump impeachment, that would just show that they are going after that. Whereas if they go after Kristi Noem, then they can campaign on the stuff that ICE is doing, and they can campaign on what's going on in Minneapolis. I've had a bunch of Republicans, very Republican people, reach out to me and ask about what's going on in Minneapolis and express concerns to me. And these are people that have been Republican voters for as long as I can remember, and they're concerned. So I do think that that is a somewhat, obviously midterms are so far from right now, and messaging and situations change so quickly and evolve so quickly that maybe this messaging won't work come November, but primaries are starting in 6 weeks. And so right now this is an issue that Democrats can use for leverage in the midterms.
I agree. And also it's not like it hasn't been done before. When President Biden was in the White House and Democrats had the Senate and House Republicans had the House. They impeached Mayorkas. That was the Homeland Security under the Biden administration. And so the Homeland Security position is a very precarious position. Democrats and Republicans have often been on very polarizing ends of the spectrum when it comes to messaging immigration, even though once you, I think, dig into it, you'll find that the parties actually have a lot in common. But a lot of it is just messaging and fear-mongering, and that comes from both sides. It's not just one side that does that. And so I think that the Homeland Security position is often one that is very under the microscope, especially because illegal immigration, like, it is a fact that it's become a problem. How much of a problem it is depends on which party you're talking to, obviously. But I think that what that's done is it's put whoever is sitting in that position under the spotlight of whether or not they can get things done. And depending on whose administration is, you're going to probably see a resounding amount of Republicans against them if it's a Democrat, and vice versa. And so the idea that Democrats are going after Kristi Noem is not an unheard of thought. Republicans, not that everything is done that should be done because somebody else did it first, but that's been the way this Congress has operated. And that's how it's been for a long time because of the partisanship that's been growing. Everybody's first reaction when they get power back is to spend the first 7 months undoing everything that the previous administration or the previous people in power did. And I think people are really sick of that, but you do make a good point that a lot of people, Republicans, independents, Democrats, are mad about Kristi Noem. And so if Democrats are saying, we want to impeach her, if we get in power, we will do it, and then they do it, that I think is going to get a lot more traction and support. And that won't be seen as just, oh, we're just going against it because it's the Trump administration. Because if they were going to do that, they would go after Trump. And so I think that that's why that's a bit of a better play.
I mean, given everything that's going on, I mean, I could be wrong in this, but I do not think that Kristi Noem will make it through all 4 years. I don't think that that's a very...
I don't think she's on the right track.
I don't think that's an outlandish take at all.
No.
And I kind of expressed that to some people back at home whenever I was home for the holidays. And one of them texted me this week and he was like, I thought you were crazy when you said that. And this is a lifelong Republican voter. And they were like, I thought you were absolutely insane and that you were just speaking DC nonsense whenever you said that back in December. But he was like, there's no way she makes it.
I mean, it shows how crazy something can happen and just completely change it. And you said this also, that, it might not be a big deal come November. I mean, we've talked about the way that social media and messaging, and the way that news and politics flows in and out of it. I mean, you think back to the Charlie Kirk shooting. We thought that was going to be the biggest thing.
That feels years ago.
It feels like years ago. And we thought that was, and that's the point, is that it feels like it was years ago, but it wasn't. And it felt so big at the time. And now.
And it still is.
And it still is, but now it's just, another slot added to the crazy things that are happening as opposed to, 20 years ago, that would have been the biggest news story for a year. And now what we have is the stuff happening in Minneapolis, and that's a huge story. And I think that everyone kind of thought the way that the Charlie Kirk shooting ebbed and flowed was the way that it was going to go with Renee Good. It ebbed for a while, and then it flowed. And then as it was going back down, then Alex Preddy's shooting happened. And then that's when it woke up. That's when you saw Republicans started speaking up. Because before, with Renee Good, they didn't speak up. They were like, we trust law enforcement. But then with the Alex Preddy thing, they were like, oh, it's been 2 weeks and we already have another one. This is actually not going to go away like other news cycles.
I also think that there was a big factor with the Alex Preddy shooting comparatively to the Renee Good shooting was that he was armed. And a lot of Republicans have really backed the NRA and the right to bear arms. And being killed for carrying or being considered dangerous for carrying does go against Republican values. You've seen the NRA speak out against the Alex Preddy shooing, which is crazy.
Not on my bingo card. It also didn't help that the Trump administration officials were like, well, he shouldn't have been carrying a gun. Every 2A person was like, we've used that excuse. Democrats have used that excuse before, and we've pushed back against it, but now you're using it?
Yes.
That's not what we stand for.
Even Kyle Rittenhouse, who has been accused and charged of similar things, just a Republican doing it to Democrats, he came out and was like, this was wrong, which is crazy because Kyle Rittenhouse is maybe one of Democrats' biggest ops.
Yeah.
And so for him to come out and say that it was wrong was pretty big. I do think that was a big
as an organization
factor.
Coming out, I think, was a big deal. I think that, this is a organization that gives grades to Republicans and tells them, you're doing an A+ job, you're doing a B+ job. And Republicans run on that, especially if they're facing a primary challenger. They really rely a lot on two things. They rely on the 2A supporters and they rely on the pro-life supporters. And when you don't have one and you don't have the other, which is the way the Trump administration has been going now, you've seen pro-life people getting mad at the Trump administration for things that he said. alienating yourself from the 2A lobby is a choice. And I think it could really hurt you, especially if you're going into a midterm year where some of your members are facing primary challengers, or you're looking to flip seats. And if you don't have that, core Republican tenant value, that kind of just diminishes your argument.
Yeah, I mean, March for Life was a few weeks ago in D.C., and there were anti-Trump signs.
At the pro-life rally.
Yes, because they don't feel like they have done enough in their administration. And so to have both of those organizations kind of turning their back on the administration or the Republican Party as a whole is a very big deal. And we will be keeping up with all of it as things continue to unfold. But up next, we have an interview with Congressman Ryan Mackenzie on healthcare.
Well, Congressman Witt, thank you for coming on Capitol Conversations.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And so you are one of the moderate House Republicans who serve here in Congress, and that is a tall order sometimes, especially in our political climate. It gets you involved in a lot of different things, and it really puts your voice on the pedestal to lead a lot of key areas that I think a lot of people want to hear about. And one of the biggest ones that you have been involved with over the last months or so has been healthcare and the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And that's something that a lot of people that are on our audience like to know about. I wanted to get your thoughts on, just from your perspective, why these Affordable Care Act tax credits are at the center of healthcare conversations, and why you as a Republican helped Democrats to find some sort of pathway forward.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to recognize first and foremost the structure of Congress nowadays, where even though Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the White House, to get something passed that is a policy change in the Senate, you do need 60 votes. And so that forces a requirement that you have some kind of bipartisan buy-in in an issue like this. And when we're looking at healthcare and affordability in general, we are trying to find ways that we can make not only short-term changes to provide relief for individuals, bring down their costs immediately, but also making long-term changes that will bring down the cost of healthcare. And so what we've been doing is we've had bipartisan groups that have come together, both bicameral as well, and we put out proposals for a 1-year extension and a 2-year extension, paired with other reforms that would make sure that we have income caps so that high-income individuals aren't receiving these tax credits. We had anti-fraud provisions to make sure that people weren't abusing these tax credits and getting payments for plans that people maybe never even used. And then also pairing them with long-term reforms, things like transparency, expansion of HSA accounts, PBM reforms. All those ideas were on the table to bring down the cost of healthcare for everybody. And we put out these 2 bipartisan proposals in the House. Groups of roughly 30 or so Republicans and Democrats from both the House and Senate have signed on in support of those. And so those were really the frameworks that we think could be used as a model. Now, what we did with the discharge petition is, since we couldn't get our leadership to sign on to actually moving a bill on the floor, we couldn't get Democrat leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, to actually support a discharge on one of our bipartisan frameworks. He, I believe, wants to use this as a political issue instead of solving the issue. And so the only path to actually get something, a vehicle and a bill, over to the Senate was the 3-year clean discharge. I don't think that's going to be the final product. And the reason for that is because the Senate had already voted that down, that same proposal. They had also failed to actually pass with 60 votes a reform package as well. At the same time, we see in the House, we were able to pass a reform package. We ultimately passed not only the discharge coming out, but also that actual bill passed on the floor. So there is majority support for both of those ideas, not only an extension of the tax credits, but also reforms in the House. The models and frameworks that we have in those 2 bipartisan solutions exist, and the Senate now has this opportunity to stitch that together and send something back to the House, hopefully, that we could see here soon. I don't know where it's going to go. The Senate, who, again, some of those senators were part of these discussions, they have said how complicated this is as an issue. And, I think some people like to just say, well, just do this or do that. I thought it was very telling, a quote from Senator Dick Durbin that was just in the press recently in the past day or two, where he said, "This turned out to be much more complicated than we thought." And I kind of, had to chuckle a little bit because people, on the outside and elsewhere are just saying, well, why don't you just do X, Y, or Z? We have tried different configurations. It's a very complicated issue, very difficult to get that 60 vote bipartisan buy-in in the Senate. But we're making our best attempt at it here because, again, we do recognize that people need short-term relief, but also bring down the cost of healthcare in the long run.
And so this was a big deal at the end of last year. It was all over the news. People, on social media, people who didn't even really know what was going on in the nitty-gritty political sphere were posting about it like, oh my gosh, healthcare is at risk. And kind of like other things that have happened over the last couple of years, it's a really big deal for like 2 weeks and then it subsides. And then it comes back and then it subsides. What is like your message to people, especially those who are impacted by the fact that these credits expired? The average social media user probably doesn't really know what's going on with this, but for some people, like you said, they need relief and they need relief now. What can you tell them that Congress is doing to help? Because I think a lot of people right now, and we've gotten questions from people, they are worried that this is just going to be the latest thing that gets thrown in the trash bin and it doesn't get revisited by Congress.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize what you started this conversation with is that there are bipartisan groups of legislators who are actually interested in governing, actually getting something passed. It's not just about talking points for one day or one week or anything like that. We actually want real solutions. And that's why I came to Congress. And you're not going to be able to solve every problem, but in something as significant as healthcare, I think we owe it to the American people to put forward a good faith effort to work in a bipartisan fashion, try to get something done. And that's what we were doing here. And I think we demonstrated a strong willingness and a strong interest that is out there amongst a big group of members. And I'm confident that if you could actually get something like this to come back from the House or to the House from the Senate, I think you could actually get it passed and signed into law. In the absence of that, if it doesn't occur, that doesn't mean the issue goes away. I think we've done a lot of good work in raising this issue, raising awareness on the topic of healthcare affordability. We know that for millions of people, healthcare is simply unaffordable right now. And so we do have to figure out, again, long term, what are those changes that we're going to be making? And I mentioned some of them. There are a number of other bipartisan efforts and things that are out there that I'm working on that I think ultimately we can get some of these done. But we really have to because for many years, affordability has been a challenge. And it was on the 2024 campaign when I was running for office, continues to be in food and fuel, housing and healthcare. We've begun to turn the corner on some of these issues, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
And can you talk a little bit about, you had said that, a lot of the reason why Republicans such as yourself had to turn to this discharge petition, which for a lot of people don't know what that is. It's basically a petition that forces a vote on a bill. A lot of it was because leadership of both parties were unwilling to come to the table to help either party and their own parties at times. Can you talk a little bit about what those discussions were like personally for yourself with you and Speaker Johnson, other leaders of your party, to let them know, like, hey, this is a big deal for me. And so I'm not going against you. I just need to do this for my party. But I think a lot of people don't really understand that there are times where Republicans don't always have to vote with Republicans and Democrats don't always have to vote with Democrats. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think, when we talk about these coalitions that we've brought together, these bipartisan groups, I think what we're up against in many instances are the political makeups of districts that are just like ours. I mean, they are solidly Republican, solidly Democrat. Republicans in many instances, because the tax credits have some connection with Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. They have run and campaigned as strongly opposed to that program. And I recognize that program is broken. For millions of people, healthcare is not affordable. And so the American Affordable Care Act was a misnomer to them. So I understand that. For Democrats, there is right now a belief that I think in their party exists where they can use healthcare to run against the president and against Republicans in midterm on an issue that is important for so many people. Also, not a great justification for not coming together and working on this issue. And so I think we're up against these blocks of members that actually prefer to see nothing happen. And so again, Republicans, because they want Obamacare just to go piece by piece away into the night, and Democrats because they don't want the issue to actually be resolved. That's not really, again, trying to help the American people and the people that sent you to office. And so I believe that there is a strong contingent and actually a majority in the House that you could get to vote on this issue if you can actually come up with a compromise that achieves something for both short-term and long-term relief. So we're going to continue to work at it, but that is what you're up against. And I'll say Speaker Johnson does a fantastic job navigating the different factions and different individual interests of our conference. I did speak to him after I signed the discharge. He said, obviously, he did not like the fact that it was used because it's not the preferred course of him and the leadership team. At the same time, he does have an understanding and recognition that people are represented to elect or to actually represent and reflect their own individual districts. And so he said, hey, if that was important to you and you feel like that's something that you had to do for your community, then he was understanding of that. And I appreciate that recognition that, again, we all don't come from monolithic districts. We all have unique interests all across the country. And that recognition is, I think, the sign of a good speaker.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll be sure to be following you and other members on this healthcare journey. And thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to our Q&A section, our favorite part. And we have a question from Leslie. And she asks, what immigration reforms are on the table and what are likely to become law? That's a good question.
And a loaded one. And one that is going to cause a lot of controversy. On the Hill, I wrote a story last week about how it's already creating a lot of problems in the House Republican Conference. You saw House Freedom Caucus, who is some of the really far-right members of the party, or the most far-right members of the party, come out and kind of slam these moderate Republicans who are looking for immigration reforms. We've seen some members like Tom Suozzi, who's a Democrat from New York, and Brian Fitzpatrick, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania, both very moderate members. They wrote a letter to President Trump to sit down and have a meeting with him and go over some immigration reforms. We saw Congressman Mike Lawler, who's a Republican from New York, come out and say that they want to find some sort of legal status for illegal immigrants with non-criminal records who have been here for a long time to find a pathway to citizenship. And so there's a lot of talks. A lot of those moderate members are in the Problem Solvers Caucus. And so I think that there's a lot of talks within that caucus and trying to sit down with the president and see what's possible on an immigration reforms part. You see those Republicans who are saying there were absolutely problems with the Biden administration. The Biden administration let so many immigrants in, and that was a problem in itself. But obviously what is going on right now is not working, and so there needs to be a middle, and they need to come to kind of a middle ground with multiple sets of solutions on immigration reform, which we don't necessarily know what that is yet. Nobody's laid out exact framework in the House or any like bipartisan groups of members, but there are talks with all of that, and they do want to sit down with President Trump, so we'll be following that for sure.
I think also what you've noticed is that Republicans are coming out, and albeit a few of them, Fitzpatrick, Lawler, like you mentioned, are coming out with these ideas of immigration reform that have been pushed by Democrats for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so what I do find interesting about it is you're not seeing Democrats coming out and be like, oh, well, too little, too late. Like, we've been saying this for years. Yeah. Blah, blah. Like, Democrats are actually seeming like they want to work together, which I think is a good move for them, because I think them coming out and saying, oh, well, we've been asking for this for years and now you're just doing it because it's politically convenient. Like, that is oftentimes the calling card for Congress nowadays with how just hyper-partisan it is. But I think this immigration reform for both parties, or I should say this topic of immigration for both parties, is now on shifting sands. Neither party has the winning message. I think we entered this year.
Which is interesting
because we entered after 2024 into 2025 and now in 26. I would say that it was probably arguable that Republicans had the upper hand on immigration messaging. Mm-hmm. Democrats had not figured it out.
It was one of their winning issues in 2024.
That's why they won, arguably, is why they won. And then you have Democrats now who were seeing like the shootings and the ICE stuff, and people were starting to get uncomfortable because ICE was impacting their lives. Everyday people were now going down into their cities.
Citizens,
and getting afraid that they were going to get targeted, especially because you're hearing about so many citizens who are being targeted just because they look like they're an immigrant, which that's, a whole other thing. But I think now what's happened is that immigration has become something that Democrats are starting to lift up on and Republicans are starting to come down on but neither party is now going to cancel out the other. I think that the only way forward, and that's what Lawler said in his op-ed, was that the only way forward is to work together. If we keep just saying the Democrats are not on the right side of this issue, it's never going to work. If Democrats keep blasting Republicans for this, and that, it's not going to work either.
Yeah.
And so we've seen like Senator Schumer, he's come out with a few, I'm going to read them just from this list. He wants, federal officers to end roving patrols, which would be like tightening warrant requirements and mandating that ICE coordinates with the state and local law enforcement, which is a pretty big deal. And then another thing too is that they want to prohibit the use of masks while also requiring body cameras. That was something that the body cameras part, they actually got put into the DHS funding bill. So that was kind of a win for Democrats. But I think the overall thing is that they just want, Democrats aren't looking to completely end immigration operations because they know that that's a losing battle, but they want to make sure that there's accountability because obviously U.S. citizens are not going to be exempt any longer from any of their patrols or their incidents.
Which is not a new push. We saw Governor Gavin Newsom in California try to unmask ICE officers. I'm not sure how successful that's been, but that was a push very early on in last year and very early on in
And it's
Trump
interesting because when he
2.0.
did that, everybody was kind of like, that's a choice. But now that it's become something that is more mainstream now because of all the incidents that have happened, it's not unheard of that could be a potential reform.
Yeah. Well, we will keep y'all updated on all of it, but that's a wrap. Thanks for watching Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And as always, make sure to like and subscribe to follow us on all of our platforms, y'all already know, and to read at WashingtonExaminer.com.